Save 10% with my code BOBBY10 on raw, organic, grass-fed and grass-finished freeze-dried organ meats from Grassland Nutrition. Link in the description box. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name is Bobby. Guys, today we're going to react to the Yaqeen Institute with their video, Is Sharia the most barbaric form of law? My journey towards Islam has been a journey of clearing up misconception and previous biases about Islam. I had so many misconceptions because I listened to famous anti-Islamists. But once I actually started doing the research by myself, this is when out of a sudden it started making sense. Out of a sudden the pieces came together and I got surprised how logical and congruent Islam is, especially if you compare it to the other Abrahamic faiths. You will see that they are not so different at all. The main difference, however, is that the Muslims proudly represent what is within their scriptures. Christians, on the other hand, seem to be ashamed of what is found in their scriptures. If you look into Leviticus, for example, which is the Mosaic law, Moses, a prophet of God, a man that has been sent by God, and he is a prophet to the Christians, of course. Why do they not adhere to their own doctrine? In Leviticus, you can find the passage, if a man lies with a male as if he were a woman, both men have committed a detestable, perverse, unnatural act. They shall most certainly be put to death. Their blood is on them. But the Christians nowadays will say, Old Testament though. What does that even mean? That you only adhere to the New Testament? Why is the Bible composed of the Old and the New Testament then? Why don't you just get rid of the Old Testament altogether and simply keep the new one if you do not want to obey those laws? I make the argument that any religious scripture from the lens of liberalism, modernism, can be seen as archaic or barbaric. That of course doesn't explain anything because modernity led to the biggest degeneracy that we've seen so far. Anyways, enough rambling. Let's see how barbaric bad Sharia is. Let's have a look.
Is Sharia the most barbaric form of law?
Often, the only things people in the West associate with Islam are stoning and hand chopping. This illustrates how our society has profoundly misunderstood Islam and Sharia.
Sharia calls for chopping off hands and stoning for cheating on someone, and even lashes. It's just cruelty disguised as law by a God who is supposed to be the most merciful.
This symbolizes the mindset of the modernist. Oh, stoning for cheating on someone. At the same time, in your society, cheating is frowned upon. Nobody wants to get cheated on. Of course, we do understand intuitively that it is bad to cheat on each other. However, indirectly, it is glorified in our society, even though on the surface level, it is frowned upon. Dating apps, clubs, meeting with colleagues for drinks and whatnot. All of this is a-okay in our society, even though it destroys families. Nobody suffers any consequences for it. However, if you were to take revenge upon a person that harmed your family, you're going to jail. There's absolutely no justice within this justice system.
He sure is.
Who are you?
I'm Shibli, the Sharia scholar.
So all this stuff is part of the Sharia, right?
Depends on what you mean by part of.
Are you really going to say that all that isn't cruelty? The Muslim God loves punishing.
Aha, that's where you're wrong. When applied correctly, Sharia is actually based on God's mercy, not God's anger.
You're not serious.
I am.
Where on earth do you get mercy from any of that? So you want us to cruelly cut people's hands off and stone them?
No.
What does mercy even mean in such a context? Simply following your own desires?
Oh, be merciful, be nice to me.
My son is 1.5 years old. Should I have mercy upon him and let him watch cartoons all day and eat chocolate? Of course not. I'm gonna turn off the TV and I'm gonna give him a steak. Obviously, I'm a father that truly has mercy upon his son, therefore I want the best for him. If we think about salvation for human beings, we want them to enter paradise. Should we let them live in filth, in sin?
Not at all. You just assumed that.
Then what's merciful about any of it?
For that, you need to know what Sharia actually is.
I already know what it is. It's Islamic law.
Not exactly. Let's start with the basics. Sharia is actually the Islamic idea of God's law. It literally means the way to the watering hole, and it governs aspects of everyday life in Islam, including religious rituals. There are
Right.
5 main objectives of Sharia: to preserve human life, faith, intellect, property, and family.
Let's analyze this. Sharia is about the preservation of human life. It is the preservation of faith, the preservation of intellect, the preservation of property, and of course the preservation of family. Let's compare it to a liberal Western country. What kind of respect for life does a liberal Western country truly have? They're mutilating children, telling them they can be girls if they are boys, ultimately not appreciating, not accepting life, not accepting what they've been born as. They've been born in a male body, in a female body, but they are not going to accept this because they do not appreciate life. The Western culture has become a technocratic nightmare, the exact opposite of what preserves life, of course. If we go further with those ideas, we're going to end up being robots, wiping out humanity altogether. Point 2 is the preservation of faith. Yet again, stark contrast to the West. This is why they are opposed to Islam. Even Christians in the West are opposed to Islam because they are not really faithful. They don't really want to obey God's law. Of course not. They want to enjoy the perks of liberalism. They want to enjoy their freedom. They are not interested in a God-fearing society. And this is why Islam is under attack. Here you can clearly see that number 2 of the Sharia is the preservation of faith, which you of course do not have in an atheistic Western country. Number 3 is the preservation of intellect, which I was very surprised with whilst reading the Quran, because the Quran questioned us and asked us to use our intellect, our reasoning. Again, in direct comparison, the Western country simply asks you to obey their laws. Of course, there is no questioning of those laws. Simply do it because it's good for you. Number 4 couldn't be any more different than the Western countries. Yet again, the Western countries create debt slaves. It is super hard to actually get a property. Moreover, it is very easy to get your property taken away from you. Ultimately, they are pushing The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab that tells you you will own nothing and be happy. Great times. Number 5 is the preservation of family. Yet again, an absolute direct contradiction to the West, which is all about promiscuous dating culture, studying until you're 45, not having children, going vegan, destroying your fertility, becoming a feminist and whatnot. Of course they hate
Sharia
Islam.
can come from 4
Obviously.
different sources.
It's the opposite
The
to the West.
Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, and the Sunnah, which is the prophetic lens through which the Quran is read, are both revelations of God. The other 2 sources represent the human effort to channel the revelation of God through the early Muslim application of the Quran and Sunnah and the legal reasoning by Muslim scholars. Together, these 4 sources make up fiqh, which refers to the concrete applicable rules constructed through those 4 sources. Fiqh covers the detailed rules and rituals of prayer, fasting, charity, hajj, animals, marriage, divorce, property, and more. A typical comprehensive book of fiqh can be well over a dozen volumes. Notice how thin the book on hudud, crimes and punishments is. It forms a very small part of actual law. We'll get to the hudud in a minute. First, how does the Sharia work? To help you understand this, let's compare it to the legal system we have here in America. The basis of each is actually very similar.
Impossible.
Take a look for yourself. American law, as you know, is a broad legal concept that varies in application based on state or locale.
Yes.
It regulates violations of civil law and violations of criminal law. In the same way, Sharia is the idea of God's law that varies in application based on state or time. It regulates violations of the rights of God and the violations of the rights of God's servants, us, humans. Sharia teaches Muslims to abide by the law of the land, so long as they are able to practice their faith. This falls into one of the intentions of the Sharia, which is harmony and order. Notice that punishment doesn't show up anywhere as a purpose of Sharia. In fact, did you know that in a typical book of fiqh...
Yes, of course not. Why would it be? As a father here, yet again, Daddy Bobby here, I have to compare it to parenting. Parenting is not about punishment. You do not want to punish your children. If you're not a sadist, that is. You want to teach your children, discipline your children so they become good humans. Punishment is the last resort if everything else has failed. But yes, sometimes you need to punish them in order to bring them back to the right path. It's really, really simple.
Less than 2% was devoted to hudud crimes and their punishments.
Wait a second. What does hudud mean again?
Hudud is the Arabic plural for the word had, and it literally means limit or boundary. Hudud crimes are violations of the rights of God. Their punishments are specified in the Quran or Sunnah, and some hudud crimes can also be violations of the rights of humans.
So like stoning for adultery and the hand chopping off for theft?
Exactly.
I've heard there isn't a punishment as harsh as these for murder. Why is that?
That's a good question. It's actually quite simple. Murder is seen by the Quran and Sunnah as a private wrong committed to individuals and families as violence and as a disruption of public order. So in Sharia, the family brings the case to the court and gets to decide on the punishment with the judge. If there is no family to bring the case, the state oversees the disputes and carries out the punishments.
And all the
Fair
rest
enough.
of hudud punishments are violations of God's rights? How does stealing from someone affect God?
This actually reminds me of an incident that I just heard about in Afghanistan. There was a father and his child got murdered. So the Taliban under Sharia gave this man the chance to revenge, and therefore he was allowed to publicly execute the murder of his child. I would say justice served.
All the rest of hudud punishments are violations of God's rights? How does stealing from someone affect God so much that he wants to amputate someone's hands?
That's another good question. Why do these crimes hurt God so much, you ask? They don't. In Islam, God isn't hurt by the doings of people, but people are hurt. They suffer actual damage and loss.
Right.
So if people's rights are violated, they need to be restored. God isn't actually harmed if you violate his rights. In this case, it's God's mercy that defines Islamic legal procedure.
Sure, because it's possible to be merciful while having the cruelest punishments. Right.
It is.
Yet again, this cruelty is an interpretation of your little human mind. If you talk to vegans, for example, they will say, "Stop the cruelty!" And they are talking about you eating steaks. For them, slaughtering an animal is the cruelest act. So evil. For you, on the other hand, getting your arm chopped off is oh so cruel. Yet again, do you want to live in a society of thieves and robbers? I personally do not. And guess what? I'm not a thief nor a robber. I would welcome harsh punishments for thieves and robbers so we have a safer society. Very simple.
Something called subuhat.
Shubu what?
Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "If you find a way out for the person, let them go. For it is better for the authority to err in mercy than to err in punishment." This statement defines the central principle of Islamic law, maximizing mercy. There is no Islamic law without mercy. All of these legal principles shown here put concrete limits on the hudud and call to ward off the hudud punishments by shubuhat. Shubuhat are ambiguities, or anything that establishes even the slightest doubt to the case, which annuls the hudud punishments. Historically, Muslim scholars hunted for any possible ambiguity to avoid implementing the hudud. For example, in order to cut off a hand for sariqah, which is a specific kind of theft, the perpetrator must have met all 80+ requirements. If any one requirement was not met, it established enough ambiguity to make the hudud punishment of cutting off the hand unlawful. The principle of shubuhat made it nearly impossible to implement any of the hudud punishments.
That's it? So they were always off the hook?
No, if there was sufficient evidence, the perpetrators could have still been disciplined, but under a different category of law. For example, in American law, a person could be found guilty under civil law, but innocent under criminal law, and vice versa. In the Sharia, a person could be found guilty of violating the rights of humans, but innocent of violating the hudud. And non-hudud offenses were dealt with according to tazir, meaning the judge set the punishment.
But was all this actually historically applied?
For the most part, yes. For example, in 500 years of Ottoman rule, there was only one instance of stoning for adultery, and shubuhat were extensively applied throughout Mughal India and Egypt.
Wait. So you're telling me the punishments were cruel, but you basically couldn't apply the punishments because the requirements were so extensive? What's the point of having such cruel punishments then? You guys would save yourselves a lot of bad press.
That's another good question. Why have rules if you won't follow them? It's like Germany Bentham's theory of utilitarianism. E equals S times P. This equation means that if there is little chance of getting caught, then the law has to be harsh enough to scare anyone away from ever committing the crime.
Makes sense.
Having
Yet again.
laws on the books that are not intended to be applied is normal in all types of law. For example, in American or British law, judges and juries used to find loopholes to reduce punishment, like purposely undervaluing stolen goods to drop the crime from a death punishment to punishment by flogging. Just like how in the Shariah, judges and scholars would search for shubahat or ambiguities to reduce punishments and avoid the hudud, but still maintain order. So, you tell me now, is the Shariah barbaric?
Sharia is the idea of God's law that governs every aspect of a person's life. Hudud crimes were violations of God's rights. Non-hudud crimes were punishable by ta'zir or the judge's discretion. Hudud crimes punishments were almost impossible to apply because of three things: the shubuhat, which were tough requirements needed for something to be considered a crime, the importance of presuming innocence until proven guilty, and a fair and balanced court system. I guess it's not as terrible as I thought.
That's okay. Legal systems can always be a little tough to wrap our heads around. If nothing else, just remember how Ibn al-Qayyim, the Muslim theologian,
If nothing else, appreciate that Islam comes with a legal system. Which other religion has a legal system in place? None whatsoever. This is what leads to secularism.
describes Sharia. The Sharia is entirely justice, compassion, wisdom, and prosperity. Therefore, any ruling that replaces justice with injustice, mercy with cruelty, prosperity with harm, or wisdom with nonsense is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia, even if it is claimed to be so according to some interpretations.
Alright guys, and this is it for today's video. Absolutely informative. I hope that the liberals will appreciate this video, and moreover I really hope that the Christians will appreciate this video, because if you look into Christianity you will find a lack of law, and therefore we need a legal system. What to do? Let's separate church and state. Let's create a secular government. And what kind of government do we have in place now? It is atheistic, of course. It is atheistic by default. So all the laws executed do not conform with God, but simply with man. It is the definition of man-made laws. And apparently people nowadays love to follow it. There is no justice in laws that have been established by men. We of course need a divine law. And this is why, yet again, for the Christians, you must prefer living in an Islamic society over a liberal society. What is not to understand here, truly? If you believe in God, you believe in the Abrahamic God. Alright, you have theological differences. You believe that 3 is 1. You believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Fair enough. Under an Islamic society, you would still be able to practice, but moreover, it would be secured that your daughters would not become degenerate whores. Think about it logically. Under Sharia law, this liberalism would be stopped. You wouldn't have promiscuous sex everywhere you look. You wouldn't have dating apps, dating shows, and whatnot. Moreover, you would have mandatory modesty within your society. Do you like it when your children go out and everybody is wearing mini skirts, hot pants, and whatnot? I personally find it reprehensive and disgusting. I will never forget it, man. I was roughly 12 or 13 years old in Germany, and out of a sudden girls started dressing up sexy. They started wearing thongs, they started wearing mini skirts and whatnot. I couldn't believe that girls would put on such clothes. I was consistently bombarded with sexuality, and this of course messed with my mind. Guess what? I failed at school due to that. I was chasing girls all the time. In a society that appreciates modesty but moreover actually cares of God's rights, as you can see here in the background, every religious believer would live better. Alright guys, but this is it. Absolutely mind-blowing that people nowadays really don't understand this and still see Islam as the enemy. Honestly, you're not true Christians if you see Islam as your enemy. We should unite, of course, Muslims, Christians, every other religious person that recognize what is going on in this world. We have a common enemy, the devil, which manifests in our liberal secular governments. Alright guys, yet again, let's cut it off here. If you like the video, leave it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, guys, please do so. And if you want to support this channel, all the links are in the description box below, guys. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. As always, may God bless you all. Much love and peace.